What I loved about this conversation is that I feel like we got clear on what's possible in education.
Yes, sir.
And there's a different narrative that we can share now about. It's not like you said, most people just don't know. They don't even know any better because they're not spending all their days and nights thinking about it like we are.
Right.
And also that everybody has the ability to change. Everybody has the ability to lead change, and that change doesn't happen from the big government entity or the big bureaucratic school district. It does happen, but what's really going to happen if we're going to actually create massive change and disruptive innovation is through the people that care the most on the ground in the communities that literally care the most about these kids, because they're the ones that are raising them, right? The parents, the people in the community, the kids themselves. That's where the real change is going to come. All right, welcome everyone. Excited to be here today with Matt Beaudreau. Matt and I actually have met a few times, been several years, but we met when he started Acton and Placer, which I know you heard about in the bio. But yeah, it's great to have you on, Matt. Thanks for coming today.
It's great to connect, man. It has. It's been too long.
It's been a while. Yeah, a lot has happened since we
met. But it's been a few years since we sat down. So no, it's great to connect.
Yeah, and we basically started our school around the same time. I think about 2017, right? Was when you launched Acton Placer?
Yes, sir. Yep, I launched the first campus of the Placer Schools in 2017. You're correct, sir. Yep.
Okay, yeah, and we launched Growth Public Schools in fall of 2017. So we were right on the same trajectory.
Yep.
Well, I'd love to hear about what was your why? Like, why did you decide to launch Acton Placer? And you were one of the earliest ones, right, to take the model and bring it into a new region?
Yes, sir. Yeah, that was the first one anywhere near anything in Northern California at all. Still relatively early as a network, and I always talk about my why as really my kids, and seeing what I call the game of school, from the inside out, and always preface it going, man, we need good humans in schools, period, end of story. I'm the biggest supporter of teachers, administrators. Like, I am the biggest supporter of those people.
Yeah.
Reality is, so many young heroes, the best humans they're ever going to see are those at school, because sometimes they're not going home to the best humans, right? So I'm the biggest supporter. So I always want to make sure that is abundantly clear.
And you worked in public schools, didn't you, for a bit?
I mean, that was it, right?
That's where you started.
I was at I actually started at Stanford and was working there and starting to see a little bit of a game. Then it was like, wait, I grew up believing the meritocracy and this is how you did this, but wait, there's a little bit of a different element going on. That's interesting. And my young naivete, it's like, okay, well, I'll go fix some of this and help people on the public school side, right? So I guess I was a public school teacher and administrator, and again, naively was like, I'll go to work in private because I believe private probably has a different focus, and it was a very similar thing. And there were just elements of that I very much disagree with that specific model and didn't want it for my kids.
Yeah. So how old are your kids?
Mine are now 12, 10, and 7.
Okay. Got it.
So my oldest was at 2017. She was getting ready to go into school.
Yeah.
Right. And so I was like, I need a place that I really feel passionate about her going. And if I don't see it, we have a rule in our house that says don't complain unless you're willing to fix it.
Yep.
And I very much believe in that. I'm not a complainer. I'm going to go ahead and create a solution. It may not be perfect. In fact, I guarantee it won't be, but it's a solution, right? And so that's really, that was the impetus behind getting that going. And we ended up, not just launching, but doing well and building multiple campuses.
Yeah. And so your why was, it's so funny because my son is probably the same age as your daughter. And that was my why too, because I had worked in high schools. And so I just thought about sending my son to kindergarten, and I was like, oh, geez. And to your point, like, what I always talk about is I call it the operating system, but the operating system of schools has not changed. So you might have a private school, you might have a public school, but you're still working within the same kind of confines.
Exactly. And that's it, right? And I call it the conveyor belt, nice. Right? Same thing, right? So it's that conveyor belt model, and I don't personally, based on my research, and again, I always come from a place of, this is what I believe to be true. I'm glad to change my mind if better evidence is presented, but the more I've gone down this rabbit hole in the last 2 decades, the more it's actually just secured my belief that schools, the conveyor belt design, was not meant to educate human beings. It was meant to school them. It was
Yes.
meant to push them in a specific direction, but
Yes.
it wasn't meant to educate. And that's my problem with it, which is why I'm so passionate about building alternatives so people can go, wait a second, maybe there's some other options.
Yeah. Yeah. And so what I find really fascinating, we kind of talked about this before I hit record around micro schools, as I was sharing with you, that feels like where we were in the charter movement about 30 years ago, because now the charter movement, I think the first one was 1993 or 1994 in Minnesota, and then California came in 1995. So we're getting close to like a 30-year charter movement in California. And these are the kind of conversations, like the first charter school I worked at was actually in Redwood City, California, but approved by Tulum County. So like it wasn't even the same area. And our founder was super entrepreneurial and smart. And she was like, I'm not going to go to the bureaucrats that don't want me to have kids in my school and ask them to oversee me. And so what I think what's kind of killing the charter movement is that I always joke, I'm like, it's like Netflix going to Comcast cable and being like, hey, we want to do this differently. And we're curious if you would, support us and be our authorizers and oversee us. And it's like, why would we ever do that? Right. So in any case, the charter school movement did help us get to where we are and show some alternatives. And I feel like micro schools are kind of doing that now. And I like how they're small and nimble. And, so with Acton, what is it, like 100 kids max in a K-12, or how does that work?
Yeah, that's traditionally from the Acton network standpoint, they don't want to go over about 120, roughly 120 to 150. Some Actons have gone a little higher.
Okay.
And really it was more a matter of there's been some sociological experiments around communities, and if you get communities above, it's like a 200 person threshold, you start to lose the intimacy there, right? You can't have a relationship. So a lot of it was built around that concept. But also around adding in the financial element of making it feasible and keeping the cost per learner down and all of those things too. So traditionally about that size.
So, but relatively small compared to, especially like a 2,500, 4,000 student high school. I ran charter high schools, and there was actually a lot of research out of New York around 200 is like the ideal size for the same reason, like community and intimacy. But we would do 400 for the financials. Like we do 100 kids per grade, and it would work itself out. But okay, so about 100 kids. So now you're working on Apogee.
Yes, sir.
And so this is going to be like, tell us about that. It's like it sounds to me like you're launching micro schools that are different from Acton, but there's some similarities and differences. I'd love to hear about that.
Yes, sir. And so, when Tim and I, as I was running the Actons, Tim Kennedy and I have a very solid friendship, and we decided to have a business partnership too around really pouring into. It was a side project for both. We both have multiple businesses we're running, and we really wanted to have the good men in our circle, in our in our personal networks, pour into young men. And when I say good men, I just mean men of character and men of purpose and men who are driven around those things, that want to serve at a high level and be really good human beings, right? And let's give a roadmap for these young men too, and just give them some extra support. So we had built this virtual mentorship program, wildly successful, and young men from quite literally all over the world, and some of the best men on the planet pouring in. And so that became kind of what I call the first finger of what we're doing here. So we had that. It made sense as we continue to grow. We were hearing from a lot of the parents, especially the dads, going, man, I wish I had these kind of men in my story. I wish I grew up with knowing this. I was never taught how to be a leader, as a man. And so, hey, there goes Apogee Strong Dads that started in January.
Okay.
So we've got a few hundred men now as well. And that's another finger on the hand. So we've got the women and the young women, same kind of thing, that are launching. And that fifth and final finger, right, to get the full hand that's back to grasping kind of, what we think is the foundation of a free and sovereign society, which is education, is going to be, that's the K through 12s. And so very Acton-esque, very Socratically driven, very project-based, but with some very intentional differences too. We talk a lot about mental health. It's a very trendy topic now, but what we miss out, I think, a lot, and I say we, meaning just the culture in general, is the fact that physical health is the precursor for mental health for these young people. So we want to bring a very targeted, very, experiential physical education program. Not let's go play dodgeball, not here's the state standards of PE. No, a physical fitness program and including everything like from self-defense to CrossFit to, we want them to be physically healthy, understanding good food, good nutrition. We want that to be very intentional. We also want the parental growth to be very intentional. We've got all of these mentorship programs. The parents of our heroes that are going to be going through these K through 12s are going to be connected to those mentorship programs as well, because we want them to grow. Again, these mentorship programs we've developed, it's not, well, Matt and Tim think this is cool for everybody to know. We've literally we're going to Seth, Godin, and we've gone to Alex Hormozy, and we're going to people that are just like ninjas in their field.
Right.
And going, what are the projects and challenges that adults need to be taking on to move themselves forward, right, in education? And we've collaborated to put this together for them. So again, none of it is a perfect roadmap, but it's an amazing roadmap to learn how to self-educate, and all education ends up being self-education. So that's where we're going.
That's amazing. So currently you have an online program,
yes,
and
sir.
You're going to start creating schools from here.
Correct, sir. Yep, that's right. It's a targeted launch. So we have a couple of hundred applications right now that we're going through. And these are people who are saying, look, we want to bring a micro school to our community. We want to bring an Apogee school to our community. And so we're going through all the applications, and then we're going to bring them. And this is another thing that Acton as a network decided not to do. I very much love Acton and respect the decisions in the network. So I look at them as nothing but collaborators on this mission. But bringing the business side of it in, right? And helping people who want to bring these to their communities really understand the ins and outs and the pitfalls of running the business to where they are. And best practices of actually getting this open, building a great community. I've seen a lot of Actons crash and burn because they don't have that support. And again, I understand why.
Right.
And has chosen not to do it. We just want to do it a little different.
So interesting, because I was just talking with a friend of mine. I helped a friend open a micro school in South Dakota, right outside of the Native American reservation where she grew up.
Yes,
and
sir.
She was like a principal and a teacher there. And she's like, I don't want to, actually, she's coming on the podcast in a few weeks, but she's like, I don't know how to serve my community through the public system. So she opened her own school called Onward Learning. Awesome. And she was sharing that like the most vital thing that I helped her with was the actual business side. And if you think about it, most educators, it's the same in the charter space, because I've helped tons of people open charter schools, and like they'll come in and they have this amazing education, vision for the kids and the parents and the community. But when it comes down to like, well, you realize that none of that is possible unless you do X, Y, and Z on the business side. And they're like, wait, what?
That's it. And that's what I've seen so many Actons crash and burn because of that. It's not because the person didn't understand the pedagogy, or it's not because they didn't have a heart for the kids and have a network in the community. It was because on the business side, they didn't understand how to make that work, and that's it's a vital component. So, and we want to help on that as much as possible, help on the training side, but then also help where we can on the financial side. And we've got some plans on what we're going to do to be able to do that as well. So. Okay,
cool. And then I know, so are you going to be focusing on teachers or parents or anybody who's interested? How are you going to determine that?
As far as who's the owner operator?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. And we say that could be a yes and.
Okay.
Here's the hard part. And it was the same thing when I had, a number of campuses I was running, Acton campuses. I would have teachers show up all the time and go, oh my gosh, this is what I want to do. And I've been teaching for 27 years and I've got to come here. And I'm like, ooh, this is going to be a tough transition.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because you've done that for so long. This is not the same game.
Yes.
But your mentality will likely be like, ooh, this is what I've got to do, when, really you should be going a different direction. So that's the hardest part. Is so nothing wrong. Again, we're glad to work with teachers, but they're going to need to be, somewhat disenfranchised with that conveyor belt model, in order to really run towards what we're doing. Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. I fully 100% understand that just from the charter schools I've opened. Yes, sir. Where it's like you speak with them and they sound philosophically on board. Right. And then the first week of school, it's like, oh, wait, you're lining them up. And like, oh, wait, you're taking away their recess. And it's like, yeah. I'm like, wait, but you said philosophically you want kids to actually be in charge, yet you're still controlling them. And they're like, oh, wait, what? Like, it's so ingrained that, and it's a system that we went through as kids that if we went to teacher grad school or whatever, teacher school, like it's all so ingrained that you're not even aware of the fact that you're operating that way. And that's why I call the conveyor belt school system the biggest cult in our country. And people don't like it when I say that, and I understand that, but I say it for that very reason, is because we're all ingrained to believe, and we believe that specific model, done at that specific time in that specific way, we have equated that to education. And in my mind, it is anything but, because I guess it begs the question, what is education, right? And what should education be for?
Yeah.
Seth Godin was the first one to actually ask me, what should education be for? And I went, man, we never get asked that question.
Yeah, that's a great one.
But when you define it, and however that looks, I define it as, the reality to go after your version of sovereignty and freedom, and to pull out the genius, the inherent genius that's in, with you, and the ability to adapt, to learn, to unlearn, all of those things. Well, schooling tends to put a damper on all of those. And so it's getting people out of that mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. What about kind of thinking about the larger space of education change and to what you just said? Like, if we're going to create this massive change, it is so ingrained, and everyone I always tell people, everyone always has an opinion on it, right? Because it's like, well, my kids are in school, or everyone went to some version of school at some point in their life. Even if they didn't make it that long, they were in it for at least like a few years, right?
And so
everyone has an opinion. And what do you think, do you think micro schools can play in this kind of like sea change? Because what I hear people say is like, well, micro schools, it's the same thing they said about charter schools for years. Oh, they're like 5% of the market share, or like, oh, they're so like, great, I'm glad you're doing something over on the side, and like, I'm glad you're having fun and you're having your little community, that's your little bubble, and I'm glad that you guys are doing that over there, but like 97% of the world is still operating in this old way. So like, what are you doing to create like real change in the world?
Right. Yeah. I fully get that, man. And I get those questions all the time. So the way I look at it is, I think about an organization like CrossFit, right? You know what CrossFit is, right?
Yeah.
Whether you participate in CrossFit or not, the majority of people at this point know what that is.
Yeah.
And you can't deny the power of what they have done from a cultural standpoint. Again, you like it or you don't. That's not the argument here. The argument is you almost guarantee. That's too funny. I say CrossFit and I get a text message from Jason Kalipa just now as we're talking, who's the second ever CrossFit Games winner. That's funny.
Perfect.
He's helping us on the physical education side.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I want to talk about that. Let's talk about that as soon as you finish this one.
But what they did was they put a lot of eyeballs on something that became this global phenomenon, this global community that allowed for micro gyms, right, to become a thing. And so everybody was able to impact their community, and they were able to build this out. They were connected to the greater global push. And what ended up happening was, as they did that and expanded, and all these people had all these success stories coming out of it, the next thing you know, your 24-hour fitnesses, your Gold's Gyms, your Bally's, all your big franchise chains, Globo gyms, as they call them, started incorporating CrossFit style classes, right? So that is where I believe the power is, if people will really get behind this, is the more stories we're able to show of the efficacy of what we're all doing here on from that quote unquote micro school side of things, it'll force some of that change internally. And if we can start to show, wait a second, we're also doing this at a $1,000, $2,000 a year per learner clip. And you got your public schools operating at 15, 16, 17 grand a year, and they're like, we need more funding. We can just show that, we're getting better results at 2 grand a year. What's the disconnect here? It's not the funding.
No, I love this answer. I love it so much. And it reminds me of kind of the theory around disruptive innovation, right? It's like you have, every big corporation has some little wing that's like hidden away from everybody else so that they can't talk to the people that are in the box. Like, just go over there and experiment with stuff. And typically nothing really comes out of those. But what they do is that they're like, oh, we're Blockbuster. Now we're going to mimic Netflix, and we're going to use, mail CDs or have CD or DVDs. I remember what they're called back then, DVDs that you could go in and get, or they'd be mailed to you. And it's like, okay. And they don't do it very well. And then Blockbuster falls, goes down. And I know from the charter school I ran for years in San Jose, is like the district started doing all the things we were doing because it's just basic economics, right? Like you're going to have to adjust to the market, and the user, who's the parent, is like, well, there's a 700 kid waiting list at that charter school.
That's right.
And it seems like they're doing something. So we should just start copying what they're doing and do it really poorly. And 24-hour fitness, which I have a lifetime membership to that I pay $20 a year. So they hooked me because
That's
I'm like,
awesome.
well, it's so cheap. I'll just go. But they started doing this little group exercise thing. I can't remember what it was called, but it was like mimicking CrossFit. It was so bad. It
Yeah.
was so bad. But I did it because it was free. I mean, I was basically getting it for free. And I'm like, God, I know it's so much better at CrossFit, but I'm too cheap. Pay $200. So I'm just going to. So I did it for like a month or two. And I'm like, this is not as good as CrossFit. But to your point, that's how you create change with these like
That's right.
smaller units, right?
That's right. Yeah, no, I mean, no matter what, now you're aware. Now you're aware that there are options. And that's one of the biggest things that, you and I being in education, what I've seen is a lot of people who are in our educational sphere, educational circles, it's so used to the fact that we get to talk to one another and we get to talk about all this innovation, we get to talk about all these stories. We forget that the mass majority of the country truly doesn't realize how many options are available to them and what those options look like.
Yes.
We almost forget because we take it for granted because we talk about it all the time, and the majority of the world, man, they don't know that that's a thing. And so it's at the very least, the biggest first step we can take is creating that awareness for everybody. So at least the conversation actually has a place to take hold.
And having models for them. So saying like,
Yes,
have you looked at
correct.
Acton? Have you looked at Apogee? I'm having the One Stone founder from Boise, Idaho, come on in a few weeks. She's going to talk about this school that she started. The kids literally are on the board. It's a high school, and you walk in there, it looks like Google, and it's in Boise, Idaho. You never know where these things are going to happen.
Bingo.
And I remember going to visit them and seeing. I had talked to somebody from Acton, and they had brought up the CrossFit model. They're like, we're more like CrossFit than 24-hour fitness, and that always stuck with me. And then I'm driving through Boise, Idaho, going to this amazing school, and I'm seeing all these CrossFits in Boise, Idaho, and I'm like, oh, that's exactly what's happening. Like they all kind of have their own flavor, but they use the work. I don't know that much about it, but I know the basics. Like they use the same workout of the day. There's like a sort of centralized connection, but yet everyone has their own flavor, right?
Centralized programming. There's different ways that you can specialize that, you can get information from kind of the the community at large. Everybody's talking to each other. Everybody's able to innovate with each other and bounce ideas around, and then they'll come together around bigger regional or global events to share in the community of the whole thing and the mission of the whole tribe. Right. And that's the beauty of it. Acton has done a very good job of doing that. Same thing we want to do on the Apogee side. I love hearing about, so many organizations. Prenda is doing a great job.
Prenda,
Right. So, I mean, there's a number of these organizations. So again, we get more and more and more doing this. At some point, you're not going to be able to deny that's taking place.
Well, yeah. And to your point, like people just don't know about it. And I feel like with the pandemic, people were like, whoa, this is what my kids do in school. Like they were looking on Zoom and being like my daughter, we're in like the better, quote unquote, one of the best elementary schools around. And they would do 1 hour of Zoom. Because they didn't know what else to do. They're like, well, I just stand and talk all day. So I can't stand and talk for 6 hours on a Zoom. Right. And I think a lot of us parents, we saw that and we're like, And then the private schools are doing the same thing. You're like, you're paying 30 grand a year. And you're like, wow, they're not doing much different than the public schools. And what is going on here? So I think people started scratching their heads. And I know I was just reading an article yesterday, like the homeschool market has like doubled. I think it was like 6 to 12%. You probably know this better than I do, but it's starting to grow, right?
It is growing quite a bit. Last year we hit, and so I don't know what the current numbers are. I would imagine it's a little more than this, but last year this country hit 5 million homeschoolers for the first time ever since before school became compulsory. So I would imagine it's up to probably closer to 6 now. And so you've got a lot of people who are going, wait a second, there probably is a different way we can do this, and I wonder if I can do it more effectively. And we've got a homeschool tribe too. I've got a couple hundred families that I take through what it looks like to home educate too. Just that I jump on a call with them literally every single week just to make sure they're good. We send out resources every month because we want them to understand education and schooling they're not the same thing.
No, they're not the same thing. And to your point, like if we can share, I really agree with you 100% that it's like going to happen community by community.
Yes, sir.
And I asked you that's what I'll call a silly question of like, well, how's this going to create the change? It's like, well, everything starts with one person, right? It's like one person, and then eventually it starts to grow. And so I really believe it's like people in the communities that are just like tired of all of this, like the bureaucracy, the government, schools, like just all of the command and control, and really just seeing like, and then if you think about the kind of what's happening with college now, It's like, is that even, we've all been basically sold this bill of goods. Like we go to the good school, we go to the good college, and then we get the good job. And it's like, number one, is that even true? And then number two, like, how do we feel when we have that job? Like,
That's right.
I know
That's
many of my friends have had like nervous breakdowns by the time they're 40, right? Because they're
right.
like, I did it. I went to Stanford. I went to this school. I did that. And now I'm an accountant. And like, I'm bored to death.
And I hate it. And I feel like I've wasted, and I'm still in debt. And I still, yes,
Yeah.
totally. And that's, and unfortunately, the majority of us know that it's very much, it reminds me of the movie The Matrix. It's like very much, where we see this and you go, yeah, we all kind of know it, but we don't want to pull at the string and unravel and see where it goes. And a lot of that, from what I found, is it's fear, and not necessarily fear of taking a new direction. It's fear of the relationships and what I might lose if I take the new direction that really hinders a lot of people, right? It's like, okay, if I decide I'm going to try home education for my family, or I decide I'm going to go to this, something that's quote unquote an alternative school, right? And think about what it's the alternative to. But if I decide I'm going to go that route, well, shoot, what is my mom going to think of me? What is my dad going to think? What is that person down the street? Are they going to think I'm a bad parent? What is my, I've heard that anybody who home educates, the kids are weird. Like, so what about that? Afraid of that. Like, I'm afraid that I'm not qualified to really educate my child. So I'm going to send them back into the same system that I went through that left me feeling unqualified to educate my own kids. I'm like, it's this fear that, that drives the lack of curiosity around why we're still doing things in this conveyor belt fashion.
Yeah. Well, and one of my visions for this podcast and this community that I'm building around Changemaker EDU is that we start to elevate and show schools like Apogee, schools like Acton, and start to show, to your point, like the general public they don't know anything about this, and they are scared. And I've had so many conversations with people that are like, I want to homeschool. But and then they ask me, and I'm like, honestly, I don't know that much about homeschooling, but they want someone to give them a roadmap. Like, well, what does it look like? Or how do I do this? And to be honest with you, with the homeschooling, I feel like some people just don't want to do it. Like when I get into a lot of my clients that I do life coaching with and other stuff, and they're like, well, I want to homeschool. And they'll really talk about it. It's like, no, I don't. I actually don't. I just don't want my kid to be in the factory model, and I don't know what else to do. Right. And so I feel like giving them options and just saying like, there's many choices out there, and like helping them get over the fear. To your point, it's fear of being different. It's fear of screwing your kid. I mean, at my charter schools, the first question that parents would ask is, are you going to get my kid to college? And so I would love the first 2 years, the first couple hundred families that come in the first and second year, because they were like, we're going to take a bet on our kids with you. Like, we're going to believe that your vision's going to, and like, we're going to believe that even if they don't get to college, like they're going to just be better humans. Right. But then by like year 3, year 4, we're like, okay, we have a 96% acceptance rate. Like kids are going, you start naming all the schools, and all of a sudden there's 700 kids on a waiting list, right? Like those early adopters are always the best ones, but I feel like it takes like a small group to show other people that this is possible.
For sure they are. Yeah, that's such a, man, and you're right. So to your point on the fear side, that's what we have found is a lot of times again, we go back to that question of what does it mean to be educated, right? Well, I get the honor and the pleasure of working with so many young men from all over the world, of working with so many men from around the world, of working with so many entrepreneurs, of working with that. And that's the common thread. No matter what, they are trying to move past a fear to go do something, be something, get something that they are not currently doing, being, getting, right? Like that's what they are looking for. A lot of times is that it's more of an inspiration than anything else. And they're looking for somebody to say, look, I believe in you, and let's take a bet on yourself. And let's move over. Let's use a little bit of logic to show that what you're talking about may be, or may not be, relatively irrational, but let's get some courage behind all of this too. It's unwinding that fear more than anything else. And so I've started to, really ruminate on the idea that part of a massive component on being an educated human being is getting yourself to a place where you can push through those fears and have a little bit of a calm peace of mind as you're doing that. So it's definitely part of the human condition.
No, I'm really glad you brought that up, because I told you that I wanted to actually ask you as a leader, how do you do what you're doing? And like, what are, this is a perfect question. So how do you navigate? Because if you really think about it, fear is what keeps us in the status quo. Fear is what keeps us like, okay, I'm so scared I'm not going to get my retirement. I'm so scared that if I don't do the 9 to 5, I'm so scared that if I put my kid in an alternative school, people will judge me. I'm so scared. And you literally just live this life of mediocrity based on fear. So
Bingo.
what do you do to overcome the fear, to be like, I'm going to open 100 Apogee schools. I got this program, that program.
For sure.
You left the public school. I mean, I remember when I was talking to you and you were like, yeah, I'm doing public speaking. I'm like, how'd you do that? And you're like, well, I just started speaking.
Just
And
started
eventually
speaking.
people were paying me a lot more than I ever expected. And next thing I know, this is my career. So like, what's your, what do you do to overcome that fear?
Yeah, that's a really good question, man. I appreciate that. And I can point back to some very specific instances early on in my life where I was like, hey man, okay, there's something inside of me that wants to do something. Everybody else would be scared to do this.
Yeah.
But I see them not really being joyful in that fear. And I don't want that. Like I remember instances as a martial artist, as a young kid, I remember seeing like, everybody's afraid to do this. Oh, I wonder what it looks like to just do it and see if you just lose that fear. So I'm going to go ahead and go compete in that tournament again and fight that kid that nobody else wants to fight, right? That's because he's built like a moose. I'm pretty sure he's 37. I'm only 10, but that's okay.
Right.
So it's like, let's do this. I remember sitting my very first date that I ever had with a girl. I remember being, 15 and sitting in the movie theater, and I was like all excited and all nervous, but we were seeing Braveheart. And very quickly, I'm like, I don't even care that this girl's right here. I like this story. He's talking about every man dies, not every man really lives. Like I had this DNA component, right? So it was always like, how can I put myself in these uncomfortable situations? And then I would reflect on those situations and go, wait a second, I actually grew a ton from that. I grew a ton from fighting somebody else in a cage. Like I grew a ton from that. It wasn't about fighting someone. It was about me growing.
Yes.
I grew a ton from making myself get on stage, right? So I've started, building that habit, and thankfully I'm very grateful. I started building that habit early on, and it still looks like that for me. I look at my life and go, okay, how can I optimize? I don't believe perfection is possible, but I believe it should always be the standard. So how do I get into perfect health? How do I get a perfect relationship with my wife? How do I have the perfect relationship with my kids? How do I get the perfect financial situation? And just move towards that.
Yeah. So you have a vision. You're holding a vision.
Always holding a vision, right? And now I can go back into the cookie jar and go, well, I've got enough confidence and I'll bet on me enough because I have experiences betting on myself, right? I've taken the action. So I'll go ahead and bet on me that I'll figure this out as I go. I'll practice. I'm going to fail. I'm going to screw it up, but I'll get better, and I'm going to do that for every single bit of my life that I think matters. And so it's a process, man. It's not anything, cockiness is something you can pull off a shelf, but true confidence and peace is a long tail endeavor.
Yeah. And I always talk about just being really authentic. Like when you're really living authentically to who you really are. I was a basketball coach for years, and I would read like all of John Wooden's books. Yeah. And literally you could summarize all of his teachings into like three words: be true to yourself.
Yeah.
Like he just always be like, I always tell my players, be true to yourself.
Yes.
Be true to yourself. Everything else works out.
Man, because you're just connecting to your factory settings, right? Like this is you out of the box, like coming right out of the box. That's your factory setting. That's where you are. And I think, what I've been finding in education is that for our young heroes, it is often about maintaining those factory settings, right? Like not putting extra programs on top of the factory setting that really takes it away, right? And then for the adults that we get to work with, it is often trying to get them back to factory settings and going, it's addition by subtraction, right? Like what garbage have you downloaded that I've got to offload because that's actually going to do more than giving you more to do. Sometimes I got to strip away, you've owned that doesn't serve you, and so it's this interesting game there, but it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah. And I love what you're saying about, it becomes an unlearning process. And I always tell people, I'm like, what would it be like if we had adults that didn't go through a broken school system and we wouldn't have to help them unlearn all these things that were drilled into them? Because what is the belief? Like the children are empty vessels and we're just going to put all the information into these passive empty vessels. And so if that's the way you're being raised in a school and the whole thing is like, when do I get to, I have to ask to go to the bathroom and how do I line up and do all these things? It's like, okay, that's how you're going to live your life. So of course you're going to be scared. You're scared of everything.
That's right. You've been trained to be, right? You're the elephant at an early age that was tied to a post, and you physically couldn't pull away at that time, even though you wanted to. But then as you got older, that same small string still keeps you to that post, not because you're not capable of it, but because you don't think you're capable of it. You've been
Yeah,
you were trained early on, and so you'll no longer yank against that post, and you're stuck.
exactly. Until you can unlearn it. And so a lot of my listeners are change makers that have a dream about, how they want to create change, whatever is like their authentic change that wants to, I always say, like, what is the authentic change that wants to come through you? And how do you move that into the world? And a lot of people that reach out to me are like, yeah, I've always wanted to start a school, or I've always wanted to do this or whatever. And I've always wanted to change, my community, whatever it is around their dream. And they get stuck and they're like, I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to do. And I'm always like, well, let's get clear on your vision.
Yeah.
Like, what's the
Yeah.
vision that's holding you, that's driving you?
Yep.
And then let's get clear on, like, how are you going to take action steps to actually move in that direction? But most people are just really scared to do anything. And so that's why I love having people like you on, because I think they can see that it's possible.
It's always possible, man. And yeah, we talk about it as like, we say it's fire, aim, ready. And so meaning like, okay, I've got an idea of where I want to go, but instead of sitting back and like completely, let's get the perfect business plan first, right? And let me get my business cards and let me get a website up, and a lot of those things that fool us into believing we're making progress. What I always tell them is, okay, if you have an idea what that vision is, what's the first step? What's the first step in actually making it happen? You're going to fire first. And in the process of firing on that step, you'll get a little closer and you'll be like, oh, okay, I can see the target a little better, I think. And so you're going to fire again. And as you're doing that, now you're honing in your aim before you're ever ready, right? It's taking action is what actually illuminates the path for you. It starts there. We act our ways into new ways of thinking. We don't think our ways into new ways of acting. So you got to take that.
I like that. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Let me hear a little bit about the CrossFit or the physical fitness you talked about, because I think that sounds really interesting. And then we're going to wrap up. But yeah, tell us a little bit about what you're doing with the physical fit. I mean, that's so important. I love it.
It's so important, man. So, it's funny, man. So for where you are now and where I was, there was a program back in 1962 called La Sierra High School. I don't know if you ever heard anything or seen anything on them.
No.
So there's a very interesting documentary that's on Amazon right now too about the program. I wish I could remember the name of it off the top of my head, but if anybody was to just, go search up 1962 La Sierra High School, it was in Sacramento. And JFK actually even visited and was like, this is what physical education should look like in America, in our schools. And it fizzled out for a few different reasons. But if you go watch the documentary or you go look up the standards of what these young people had to hit, it was unbelievable what they were capable of from a physical standpoint. Their standards that they held for themselves were extraordinarily high. I would dare say the majority of even fit individuals in our country wouldn't hold a candle to them anymore. And they were ranked based on their ability to hit various standards, right? So you had different color shorts based on what you were able to do.
Yeah.
Right. And so, but when you go watch the documentary or you go listen to, people talk about, them when they were students, when they were there, what you find is they don't talk about the fact that they were in great shape. They talk about the fact that everybody really had a very unique camaraderie. They really supported one another. There wasn't any kind of bullying. They all did extraordinarily well from an academic standpoint, right? They are talking about how that really was the biggest thing that moved the needle forward for them. And so we want to make sure that's something that we can get into. Again, we've progressed, quite a bit in the world as far as our knowledge around physical fitness and health. But we're not sharing that with our kids, and we don't need to give them the academia behind it first. We need to get them moving and understanding that movement is fun, and it's something that can be engaging, and it's something that they just noticeably feel better. And we understand, like, here's what real food is and looks like. And we want to give them something to really build a tribe around. And I think that, again, is a factory setting. It's very easy, I believe, to build a tribe around shared physical experiences for young people. So, we've got CrossFit coaches that we are working with that are helping on some of the programming for this. We have calisthenics experts that we are working with to help give options on all these things. We have, Tim is obviously a phenomenal martial artist. So incorporating jujitsu and kickboxing into our academies and just making these so they still have options of how to be physically, moving. There's still options there, but they're good options. It's not sit out and not do anything. It's not, dodgeball and whatever. And there's a place for dodgeball, I guess, whatever, but it's not like, that's not
Right.
physical education, man.
Right.
That's not something that you take on for the rest of your life to be physically healthy, right? Like putting the nutritional guidelines in there, having nutritional guidelines around what they bring to the schools, to make sure it's all healthy options. Like we think that's just wildly underutilized as a tool to help our kids. So we want to make sure it's front and center.
I love that. And I love when I ask people a question and they get super passionate, because I can tell where their joy and their energy is. And I'm like, he's really passionate about this. So
dude, it's so important. It's so important, man. It really is. I just don't think we're doing right by them if we're not showing them that, that component.
Well, you remind me of a story. So I opened a charter school in East San Jose, and these were kids that didn't have great options, and a lot of dangerous things happening in their neighborhoods. And there was this little local gym that just opened like right down the street from us. And one day I was going over there, going in the little shopping center to get something, I don't remember. And I looked over and I saw like 40 of my 10th grade boys all just like hanging out in this little gym. And I went in there and I saw our assistant teacher, not even the credentialed teacher. Like this guy had just graduated from college and he was helping out. And he had somehow just gathered them all in the gym. And it was like their afternoon routine. Like that's what they did. And they were so into it and they were so like happy. And so he had informally provided a structure of, like you said, the camaraderie, pushing themselves, the goals. And, I was listening to Lewis Howes the other day, and he was talking about how, he started the School of Greatness because his coaches are what taught him greatness.
Yep.
He never got it in the school system. So, and it's like, that's what I love about physical education and team sports and all that, is like, you're getting all that you just talked about. It's amazing.
So much.
Amazing.
So good. Oh, so good. Yeah. So we're really excited to make sure that's a component. And then again, adding that parental side too. So they get all of this growth mindset every day, and they go home to parents who are also on the same journey. I've always told parents the best way to make sure your child's educated is to be wildly educated yourself and to bring them along. That's like really, so why aren't we pouring in and making sure the parents have a solid foundation of support too, right? If we really are concerned about changing from a cultural standpoint, then it's everybody, man.
Yeah. And I love that you're incorporating parents and growth mindset and all that. All right. So as we wrap up, anything else you wanted to share with the listeners that maybe didn't get a chance to share? Anything, kind of closing thoughts?
I think I really love where the conversation went, man, because it is, if they take away anything, I would love for them to do a little self-examination and just go, what is the story I'm telling myself? What is the story I'm telling myself about the story I'm telling myself about why I can't do something, right? What is it that fear is still got a hold on? You're not questioning it, and understand that there's a whole lot of good stuff on the other side of just diving in, questioning it, fire aim ready, going after it a little bit. There's all you have to risk is a little bit of growth, man. So I would just encourage people to dive in.
Yeah, what I loved about this conversation is that I feel like we got clear on what's possible in education.
Yes, sir.
And there's a different narrative that we can share now about. It's not like you said, most people just don't know. They don't even know any better, because they're not spending all their days and nights thinking about it like we are.
Right.
And also that everybody has the ability to change. Everybody has the ability to lead change, and that change doesn't happen from, the big government entity or the big bureaucratic school district. It does happen, but what's really going to happen if we're going to actually create massive change and disruptive innovation is through the people that care the most on the ground in the communities that literally care the most about these kids, because they're the ones that are raising them, right? The parents, the people in the community, the kids themselves. That's where the real change is going to come.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said, my friend.
All right. Well, appreciate you. Thanks for being on today, and have a great day.
Honor. You too, bud.